I was lucky enough to grow up in St Ives, in the tranquillity and beauty of Cornwall. When I moved to Chelsea in the swinging 60s, the era of flower power was, to put it mildly, a culture shock. I still remember my first sightseeing tour down the King's Road on the top of a number 11 bus, which caused my head to swing around like a demented weather vane. It felt a bit like Alice's experience emerging through the looking glass into a new world where everywhere and everything was reversed and turned upside down. And that, of course, could be a description of life today, with a pandemic of such epic proportions that future generations may speak of BC and AC, before and after coronavirus. In our reading from John, the world of the 11 disciples was also about to be reversed and turned upside down. Jesus, their beloved master, whom they loved dearly, was leaving them. Their whole world was about to fall in and leave them bewildered and filled with anxiety. Anyone who's lost a loved one will know what this kind of permanent separation feels like. But we can only imagine the feeling of losing the one who was perfect, whose fellowship was pure, whose love was flawless. And so Jesus here is anticipating their anxiety and comforts them. Martin Luther once called this passage the best and most comforting sermon that the Lord Christ delivered on earth, a treasure and a jewel not to be purchased with the world's goods. I'm sure those words of Jesus must have comforted the disciples, but they're also a comfort to us. There are so many familiar phrases in this passage, it would be impossible to look at each, but I think the opening verse is particularly relevant to us at present. Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me. As I said, like Alice's world, ours too today could be described as upside down and reversed. When have so many people everywhere felt so uncertain, lived with so many unanswered and unanswerable questions? How long will this last? When will we get to go out, meet up, travel, work normally, work at all, hug, feel safe? This virus, with all its unseen tentacles, has reached into every aspect of our lives and left us feeling untethered, adrift, and searching for solid ground. But Jesus' promise in verse 1 could not be clearer. Don't let your hearts be troubled. Just trust. He's offering us a sure footing, and with him there is a way forward. We may not see the next step, but he does. If we stay close, follow him and depend on him, we can move forward onto solid ground with the guide who won't leave us and the God who won't lose us. It's no surprise that John 14 is often used at funeral services. Because death troubles our hearts, we naturally look for some balance and stability. But this text is more than the comfort of the afterlife. It has something to say to us right now. It speaks to our troubled hearts today in these difficult circumstances. Jesus reassures us that God is not capricious, aloof, or aloft beyond the troubles of this world. If we know him, then we also know the Father. So what do we need to do? I would suggest 3 things. Firstly, we need to look into our hearts and find and name our troubles. That means being honest with ourselves. Probably the most difficult thing Jesus asks of us in today's gospel. I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel reluctant to do that. I don't want to face and name my fears. It's too difficult and too painful. It takes me too close to the edge, because when we're troubled, it can feel as if we've lost our centre. Secondly, we need to recognise a paradox. And it's this. Sometimes we have to lose our centre in order to find it. Decentering happens. It's part of life. It's part of the human condition. Sometimes it comes out of circumstances we didn't create or choose. Other times, it's a consequence of our choices or actions. But Jesus is saying that it's not a place to stay or a way to live. It's not the life he lived, nor is it the one he offers us. Now I need to issue a bit of a health warning here, and that's this, that recentering is not an insurance against heart trouble or troubled hearts. It won't necessarily fix every problem, but it does mean that our lives are tethered to something greater than ourselves. It means that our hearts are held secure by the divine life, and we're not in free fall. Jesus is reminding us that there is a centre, but it's not us. It's not the church and her creeds and doctrines. It's not our success, accomplishments, power or position. He is the centre. Verse 2 tells us that in Jesus we find a dwelling place for every troubled heart, a place of recentering. And only when our lives imitate his will we regain our centre, restore our balance, and take up residence in his Father's house. Only then will we be brought closer to God and enabled to respond differently, both to our troubles and the troubles of the world. Jesus said, "Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me." And when we put our trust in Jesus, it enables us to look for reasons to be cheerful all around us. Who, for example, would ever have thought that creating physical distance from others would actually bring us closer to our neighbours? If we only but look, there are many positive signs around us, particularly in the church. Justin Welby, Archbishop of Canterbury, said recently of our current situation, "I think one of the big effects is there's a renewal of the sense that we all belong to Christ." This to me suggests that belonging to Christ means to be centred in him. So is he right? Are there signs of renewal and that the church is changing? Well, there's no doubt that at this time of fear and worry, people are searching for a new centre to their lives. With fewer distractions and time for reflection, more are confronting questions about the purpose and meaning of life and their own mortality. But to be frank, the church can often be snail-like in bringing about change. But not, it seems, at this time. It is adapting to these new circumstances. So let's rejoice in that. It's great that churches have embraced digital worship, as has our own, at almost the speed the Nightingale hospitals were built. Tens of thousands of churches now stream their services live, and these services will stay online, perhaps for even years to come. Praise God that people can watch them, even where it's illegal to talk about the Christian faith. It's no surprise that worshipping in large buildings is now beginning to be known as analog church. I know some worry that congregations won't return to their buildings when things return to normal. But let's just entrust that to God, who after all holds our future in his hands. And thirdly and lastly, there is one vitally important thing to consider. In all this activity and creativity, we need to be careful not to fill our lives and our worship with sound. Space and stillness are crucial if we are to recenter ourselves with God. Stillness gives us the space to absorb rather than to process, to receive rather than to analyze. Mother Teresa was once asked what words she used when she prayed, and she replied, "I don't speak much to God, I just listen to him." So she was asked, "What does God say?" He just listens too. Her comments reminded me that in fact the word silent is an anagram of listen. Perhaps we ought to rearrange that well-known phrase, "Don't just sit there, do something," to read, "Don't just do something, sit there." Some 7 centuries ago, the German theologian Meister Eckhart said, "Nothing in all creation is so like God as stillness." So I leave you with a question. Are you willing to slow down and explore space and stillness? Because that is the most direct way to recenter our lives with God and to ease our troubled hearts. Amen.